Hi, welcome to Mission 919, my YouTube channel devoted to stories and information of African achievement, well-being, and prosperity. And today I'm going to talk about three essays. The first one is from Social Class and the Hidden Curriculum of Work by Jean Anyon. And in this essay, she talks about a study that she did back in 1980. So I just want to say that the income figures, the income statistics are not relevant to our times because they're from the late 1970s, and so they're very much out of date. But in her study, she visited 5 schools, 2 working class schools as she describes them, a middle class school, an affluent professional school, and an executive elite school. And what she described was different curriculum and different pedagogical approaches in these 4 categories. So in the working class school, she says that the emphasis was on getting the right answer by following the prescribed steps. So there's the right answer and the right steps to get the right answer. And creativity, innovative thinking is not fostered in any way. She described the teachers as having kind of a dismissive attitude toward the students. The teacher was always in charge. The teacher's rules were beyond question, and they seem to be made up on the fly in some cases. Now, in the middle class school, there was a lot of emphasis on getting the right answer, but there were perhaps different ways of going about getting the right answer. The rules were the rules, but they were set by not necessarily the teacher, but by the school as a whole, or maybe by the school system, the school board. In other words, they were relatively uniform, not based on the whims of the teacher. Also, in the middle class school, what else did I want to say? Maybe it'll come back to me. In the affluent professional school, it was a great deal of emphasis on creativity, creative writing, doing projects. The design of the students' work was given a priority, even sometimes over its content. The parents of the children in the affluent professional school were lawyers, engineers, doctors, business executives. What I want to say in the middle class schools, when they talked about history or social studies, current events, etc., the teachers were reticent to get into anything controversial for fear that the parents would complain, and there was very little attempt to understand things from a critical perspective or in depth. Now, in the affluent professional school, like I said, it was a much more emphasis on creativity. Students had a say in how things went in the classroom. Teachers were respectful. Students could leave the classroom to go to the library whenever they wanted. They could pretty much leave for other reasons if they wanted without a pass. So there was a great deal more freedom and negotiation about how the school day proceeded. Now, in the executive elite school, the emphasis was on a systems approach to understanding how things work, why they work, whether that was, ancient civilizations or current events or language even. Everything was based upon systems and how systems interrelate. And the students were expected to do self-present. They were expected to do presentations in which they explained an issue and proposed solutions. So the emphasis was much less on, say, creative writing per se, and more on research projects and essays. So near the end of this essay, Jean Anion has a quote that I wanted to read from. She says, different curricular, pedagogical, and pupil evaluation practices emphasize different cognitive and behavioral skills in each setting, and thus contribute to the development in the children of potential relationships to physical and symbolic capital, to authority, and to the process of work. So basically what she's saying there is that the different curriculum, what the students are being taught, the pedagogical approaches, which is how they're being taught, and pupil evaluation, how they're being evaluated, emphasize different cognitive and behavioral skills. So cognitive relates to thinking, thought processes. So she's saying that the curriculum and the manner of teaching in these different types of schools, according to her categorization, is actually training the children to think and behave differently, and that these differences relate to how the children, as they mature and become adults, will relate to physical and symbolic capital. And so I interpret that to mean how they will relate to institutions and organizations and sort of the corporate, structure of the society and the symbols that it throws up. That the children in these different schools will have actually different thought processes and different behavior patterns based on what they've been exposed to during their early years as school children, and that this is also will impact how they relate to authority in general, and to work, and to the process of work. So that's quite a far-reaching conclusion she's reaching. All right, now the next essay I want to talk about is Against School by John Taylor Gatto. John Taylor Gatto was a primary or elementary school teacher for 30 years in New York. He was selected to be the best teacher in New York City, and also the best teacher, or the teacher of the year in New York City and teacher of the year in New York State. And he taught in all kinds of schools, including quote unquote the worst schools, etc. And after 30 years, and dealing with battling different school administrations, he finally left. And he started a second career writing books and giving lectures about education and schooling. And so in this essay, he's basically saying that our education system has its origins basically in Prussia, what was a part of Germany in the 1820s, and that the Prussian school system basically was designed to control the population, and that this was brought over to the United States in the 1840s, and over the next 90 to 100 years was implemented in the United States. And he talks about how many of the greatest figures in American history had no formal education. People like George Washington, Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Herman Melville, the novelist, Mark Twain, the writer, Joseph Conrad, Margaret Mead even, and others. And he quotes H.L. Mencken, who was a famous journalist, sort of a satirist or a critic. He wrote, "The aim of education is simply to reduce as many individuals as possible to the same safe level, to breed and train a standardized citizenry, to put down dissent and originality. That is its aim in the United States, and that is its aim everywhere else." Gatto talks about people like Alexander Inglis, and I think James Bryan Conant. These were one of them was president of Harvard. Alexander Inglis was writing about, he wrote earlier, I think around World War One, basically how the purpose of education was to keep people under control, keep them divided. Basically, what he's saying is that okay, in the 1800s, uh, unions began to form, and one of the demands of the union movement was to end child labor. And so, over a course of decades, child labor became less and less used, and there was a demand that for public education. And so, he's saying that the way public education was used was meant to subvert this democratic movement that was gaining ground in the, say, this middle and toward the end of the 1800s, and that the goal was to divide people by subject and age and rankings on tests, and therefore prevent a kind of mass democracy, a mass sort of egalitarian spirit from permeating the society. So it was aimed at making sure that the hierarchy, the class, and social divides remained intact. He talks about six purposes. English talked about six purposes of education. Talking about the adjustive or adaptive function, the integrating function, the diagnostic and directive function, differentiating function, selective function, and propaedeutic function. And basically, the adjustive function was to inculcate fixed habits of reaction to authority. In other words, make sure that people behave in ways that are predictable and regular. So you know how people behave under any given circumstance, any given conditions. Integrating function, to promote conformity and sameness, homogenization among students. And diagnostic and directive function, determine the students' future role in society. And then once their future role has been determined through tests and other ways, each student is to be educated only to basically for their future role and not beyond. So you're not going to teach someone who's going to be an executive of a large corporation the same thing you're going to teach to someone who's going to be a factory worker. And then the selective function, he said, is to eliminate those people who are deemed unfit for whatever reason, and to make sure that they are, seen to be unfit by their peers, so that they will essentially be ostracized and rendered unable to be successful in life. And then the last one is to make sure you have a group that will be able to manage the system and control the population. Gatto also says that another function of schooling is compulsory schooling is to make students or young people much more susceptible to marketing, so that they become mass consumers, so that they do not have the internal resources to entertain themselves, to improve themselves, that they're always looking for external stimulation from consuming and buying commodities that are for sale everywhere. All right, now the last one is learning to read, which is from Malcolm X's autobiography. And basically, it's about his experience while in prison, learning and relearning to read. Basically, when Malcolm X was incarcerated in Massachusetts in 1945, he was functionally illiterate. He had been only to the 8th grade and had basically forgotten how to write even. And so when he was in prison, he became converted, or was was on the road to being recruited and converted by the Nation of Islam. And he wanted to, he admired those in the prison who, I guess, in and out of the Nation of Islam, who were very, learned and well-spoken, and could engage in all kinds of debates, of which there were many in the prison. And he was not able to participate in ways that he was happy with, and so he decided to attack his illiteracy. And what he did, he decided to copy the dictionary. So he started from the first page of the dictionary, and he copied the entire dictionary. And then he went to the prison library, which had a large selection given by a philanthropist, a donor, and he just plowed through that collection basically for the remainder of his time in prison, which was, I believe, 7 years. And he says that he spent upwards of 15 hours a day reading, studying all kinds of history, philosophy, ancient history, American history, genetics. He talks about studying genetics. So he studied, fairly widely and deeply. And when he was released from prison in 1952, he was able to take on a leadership role in the Nation of Islam. And he became he became the most important a minister in the Nation of Islam, founding, representing the nation as a whole, and also founding mosques and helping the organization grow until the time that he left, which was in 1963. So basically, for about 11 years, he eventually became, after Elijah Muhammad, the most important figure in the Nation of Islam. And then he also became a worldwide figure. He, in a sense, he represented at least a wing of Black America to the world, especially on the African continent and beyond, I would say. And all of this from someone who was essentially illiterate, I think he was 20, as a 20-year-old, yeah. He was born in 1945, so he was 20 years old when he went to prison. So it's an amazing example of someone who is an autodidact, someone who has taught himself, and it shows that with will and desire and purpose, the potential. I mean, not everyone is a Malcolm X, but of course, but the potential that resides in many people who are who, for whatever constellation of reasons, lack literacy, does not mean that they cannot gain those skills. It doesn't mean that in any form or fashion. So I think, there's many inspirational aspects to the story of Malcolm X, but his experience of teaching himself is one that can inspire anyone at any age, any place in the world, any time period. That kind of self-transformation, that kind of transformation is available to all of us. All right, so I hope that was useful, and bye for now.